Alrighty. And there we are. Yeah, too low frame rate. Go away. I care not what you have to say. Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or I don't know. It's kind of the middle of the night here where I am, so I'm not sure what it is where you are. Also, because as I think I've mentioned in a couple of posts, it's apparently at least part of Europe. Germany, I know for certain, is going through the. There we go. Glasses are level. Germany is having their daylight savings, and probably other countries are too, to avoid confusion. So I have no idea what time of the day it is. For all I know, daylight savings time could be totally different in Germany. They could just suddenly be a different month or a different year. Depends on how much daylight that you want to save, I guess. I mean, they could suddenly just go, oh, it's actually October 31st, 2023. So we've saved 2 years worth of daylight. And now the sun's just going to blaze down on Germany for like 6 months straight. I don't know. I don't know how any of this works. I can't even manage to do a live reading broadcast without infuriating my Facebook. So who knows? Certainly not me. Anyway, so what's going on here? Well, we survived the great rains, and we have a thin, very uncommitted blanket of little greenery growing on the hillsides around where the previously had just been dry dirt. Of course, we actually don't have that much dirt around us because we're surrounded by trees, but we have a hillside that gets very verdant in the springtime, and then by the end of the summer it has kind of died back, and it is largely brown, and now there's a whole new sprinkling of green, which is nice to see, because as I've mentioned many times, California's been in a hideous drought, really bad, and not helped at all, I'm sure, by the current shifting climate. So that happened. What else happened? Because it was raining, Johnny's had a tough week. Johnny the big dog is still kind of a nervous guy, and so whenever we go out of the house, he's very, very worried. I don't know why he thinks that suddenly we're just going to run away and leave him behind, but he definitely has that feeling. It's kind of like, I don't know, the rain, and then you went out, so he's just kind of panicky. But he was very happy. Deborah and I, it's Deborah's and my wedding anniversary, actually, yesterday, technically. And as I probably haven't mentioned, because it's not really all that interesting, but Deborah and I actually have several different anniversaries because our relationship started in a very strange off-on way I won't bore you with. But anyway, but then eventually in 1994, we did get married officially, with friends and all the legal trappings and all that stuff. So that's the anniversary that we're counting at the moment, which was yesterday. And it has been quite, well, actually, it was back a few days now that I think of it. Anyway, but doesn't matter. Was this weekend that we're celebrating. So we actually went out to dinner like grown-ups, which was quite exciting. Except, of course, it threw Johnny into a spiral of depression. And our son told us that he spent the whole night that we were out. We were only gone for like 2 hours. I mean, we didn't like have a crazy, let's go on a cruise to Norway kind of a anniversary. We just went out to dinner at a place we like. But we got back and I could hear him. He'd been out waiting in the yard, so halfway up our street, which is long and windy, as we got to the edge of our property, I could hear Johnny's bell, which he has to wear a bell because otherwise he'd kill all the local wildlife. I could hear Johnny's bell going ling, 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 because he'd heard our car. And then he ran around into the house, which is a long run across the hillside for him. And as we were coming up the front walkway, we have a glass pane in our front door, and this like dog head just pops up looking, there they are, and the ears go up. He's all excited. And we came in and, got the whole thing. So he's having a bit of a rough time at the moment, poor guy. And then of course, you can always tell when he's in that mode, because then as soon as I settle somewhere, he immediately comes and lies down on top of me as if to say, you're not going anywhere without me knowing about it. He doesn't get to come downstairs though, because unlike our other dogs, Johnny never learned that cats are not to eat. In fact, the first time that we many years ago when we had Johnny, and we'd only had him a month or so at that point, and he hadn't met either of the two cats that we had at that time, and I tried to introduce him to Jupiter, our old skinny kind of quasi Siamese cat, what's called an Oriental Shorthair. And so I picked him up in my arms. This is Jupiter. Johnny was at that point about a 65 pound young dog. And I bent over and let Johnny smell him holding the cat in my arms. And Johnny sniffed him a couple of times and then and then immediately just inhaled the cat's back leg. Just boom, like that. So I'm standing there holding a cat who's actually was fairly calm under the circumstances. He wasn't happy, but he didn't totally freak out and cut me to ribbons, although there was a bit of claw action. And Johnny is completely engorged, inhaled and filled his mouth with the cat's back leg. And of course, the rest of the family at the time, this was before we had our two additional young people. So there were just the two kids and Deborah are all standing there freaking out. And so I very quickly slid my hand into the back of Johnny's jaws so he couldn't close them. But of course, he was doing his best to hold on to this cat that he thought he was being given, I guess, as a kind of a treat. So he closed his jaws on my wrist. And meanwhile, my family, God bless them. I love my family. They're wonderful people. The kids were fairly young at that point. This is, a good 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Everybody is freaking out, screaming, oh my God. And I'm like, guys, the dog's tooth has now gone into my arm. It really hurts. I need everybody to stop screaming. And they're all like waving their arms in the air. Johnny and the cat are very calmly, the cat is half digested. And Johnny's just like, and I'm like, no, you may not eat the cat. No, this was a mistake. This whole thing was a mistake. It's my fault. I admit it's my fault. Please let go. And of course, Johnny he was really biting down by this point. Someday, if anybody's really feeling the need to be deeply disturbed, I'll post a picture on my website of the hole that Johnny put in my arm. It was quite impressive. I mean, his tooth must have gone in about that far. It was really, because, it was just that long canine that canines have. Anyway, I don't know why I got started telling this story, but, that's why Johnny is not down here with me. He would be if he could be. He would probably have his head on my lap right now after a terrifying evening where we actually went out of the house for 2 hours. But Johnny is not allowed around cats. Johnny is not good with cats. So anyway, I don't think he was raised around them, and he's a hunting kind of dog by nature. He's part pointer and part mastiff and part lab. So most of his genetic makeup has to do with getting things into your mouth. And as a result, we noticed fairly early on that he was devastating or starting to devastate, certainly terrifying the local wildlife because, we live on a fairly decent sized property with a lot of trees and wild land, which is deliberate. We wanted it that way. We love it. But there's lots and lots of wild animals living on the property, minding their own little wild animal business. Rabbits, squirrels, quail, all kinds of things. Mice, rats, voles, gophers, you name it. They're out there. And so just kind of out of pure soft-heartedness, but also I think because I literally did not want to be spending every day getting rid of animals that Johnny had dispatched. I put a bell on him, and he's had a bell on ever since. And, it's hilarious because you can hear him going back and forth across the property or going in zigzags when he's chasing something. And as I said, you can hear him from 100, 200 yards away as you're driving up the road toward our house. You can hear him running around in the yard when he recognizes the car, that he's running out from the house, to come and wait for us and make sure it's really us and not burglars or evil night bunnies or whatever things it is that he's protecting us from. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on this long tangent, except that was the evening. And then once we got home from having our dinner, Johnny just clunked on top of me and did not want to move. And, like put a leg out to touch Deb, who had gone to sleep because she was, she's on a different time schedule than I am. So Deb came home from our evening out after having had a couple of nice drinks and said, "I'm going to go to sleep." And so Johnny's lying on me, but he's got one of his legs out to make sure he knows where Deborah is too. So that's what I've been doing until now, and messing about and stuff like that. So anyway, don't know why I had to tell you all of that, except I'm just keeping you informed. This is the boring nature of the writer's life. Work, not work. That's like all there is right now. Work, not work, pandemic. That's kind of all there is. I'm not complaining. I'm somebody who's pretty happy to spend a lot of time by myself. I think most of the world is happy for me to spend a lot of time by myself. I talk to the dogs. As Deb, when she refers to herself, she says chunter. She chunters, meaning kind of talking to yourself or saying things out loud, but not really trying to make sure other people can understand what you're saying. And I do too, although with me, I'm always making conversation, either with myself or with the dogs, kind of walking around the house saying, "Well, aren't we having an entertaining evening? First you did this and then you did that, and now you're expecting me to do this? I think you might be overestimating your own charm," or, whatever. I'm just babbling away as I walk around. I think it's because I'm trying as much as possible to leave the other members of the house alone because we spend so much time together. So instead of forcing them to chat with me, I still have this horrifying drive to chat. And so I just chat with the animals all the time. It's probably evidence of some deep, deep, dark mental problem, but I don't care. Anyway, speaking of deep, dark mental problems, here's all these people, these nice people who could be doing something useful and sensible, and instead are sitting out here and waiting for me to read and going, "Good God, when is he going to stop talking about this crap?" Even worse, they might be enjoying it, in which case, then I'm very sorry for you. I really am. Anyway, so who's out there? Mark. Hello, Mark. Thank you for the congratulations. And Chris, same thing. Thank you very much. Actually, I had a few people check in on the on my various social media as well. Cliff, thank you, Cliff. Some nice happy anniversaries. Ilva wants to know, is that the shirt I wore when receiving the Schwäbischer Lindwurm? Yes, it is, in fact. And I'm wearing the same shoes, too. See, that was my going out to dinner look. Probably with the same sport jackety thing. Who knows? Anyway, Holger asks, what did I miss? I had a typical German internet problem. Holger, you missed nothing. You missed me babbling. Ilva, same thing. Just babble. Lots of babble. Telling about Johnny trying to eat a cat. Who else have we got here that I haven't said hello to yet? Said hello to Chris, said hello to Ilva, and to Holger. Andre, hello, good evening, or good morning, or whatever. Anyway, good to have you. Petra, lovely to see you. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, you guys, that you're having bad... well, not with everybody. Anyway, Mark... Hello, Alf. Yes. Johnny is very Alf-like, except that it's not so much that he lusts after cats. He just assumes that, anything small and furry, except for Walter, the Chihuahua, who is Johnny's boss. Except for Walter, anything smaller than Johnny expects he should be able to eat. So there you go. Wouter. Yes. The problem is I'd have to do a live Johnny session upstairs because, as I said, Johnny can't come down here. The poor cat, this is all she has. So anyway, did we have fallouts from the heavy rain last week? Ilva asks. No, we didn't have anything bad happen except we briefly lost power, which quite frequently happens either in a real windy storm or just a real wet storm, and I suspect, the occasional tree goes over and takes down some power poles. But we were very lucky, knock wood, that it didn't even last a full hour this time, whereas last year, the last big storm we had, we lost power for 24 hours or more, 36 hours. Anyway, Who else is out there? Chris, I said hello to you. Wouter, Chris, it's all the same people talking to each other. Ah, Sabina. Hello, Sabina. Good to see you. Thank you. Anyway, so all that said, let me see. I mentioned all the other stuff. Everybody already knows this, but I'm going to show it again anyway, just because I don't very often get to show things. So, Show and Tell, new book coming out soon. Brothers of the Wind. It is the story of Hakatri and his brother Inaluki, who would later become the Storm King in the Ostenard books. And plus, it just fills in all kinds of other things. And there's, as some reviewers have noticed, not all of them, but as some reviewers have noticed, there are also a few other social and historical sort of issues woven through it as well, in terms of class relationships and racial relationships. But I promise you, if you haven't read any of my stuff before, this kind of stuff does not take precedence over story. It's always story, first and foremost, and everything else, it either has to be part of the story, has to be woven in an almost seamless way. I'm a big believer, and I've said this many, many times, I'm a big believer in the old saying, if you want to give a lecture, hire a hall. In other words, for those of you don't know that expression, it just basically means if you really want to do something official and political, do it. But be official and political. Don't sneak it into things where, at least not in such a way that it's going to disturb or destroy the thing itself that you're sneaking it into, if that makes any sense. And I am inescapably a political person, in the sense that I have feelings about what's right and what's wrong. They inform my work. They inform my outlook on life. They inform pretty much everything about me. So therefore, I cannot avoid them, silence them, ignore them when I am writing books, since that's what I do for a living, any more than I could ignore my feelings if I worked for the government or, did anything else where I had to engage with these things all the time. But as I said, I do believe very strongly that the story is what matters. And if you tell a good story, people will imbibe whatever other stuff is there to be imbibed. And if you don't tell a good story, nobody cares, which is one of the reasons I happen to loathe Ayn Rand. Politics aside, her books were just treatises. They were just treatises on objectivism. The plots are blah, the characters are completely cardboard. This is my opinion, She, for those of you who don't know, because I'm assuming some of you folks in Europe may not know her, Ayn Rand is sort of the patron saint of libertarianism, and she started a philosophy she called objectivism, which was basically meant you don't owe anybody anything. Individuals should not care about other people. Society is crap. The strong should ignore the weak, blah, blah, blah. It's just this kind of long, drawn-out entire career of defending selfishness. And, of course, the woman herself then was quite happy to take government assistance and other kinds of assistance from other people when she needed it. But, when she was writing her heroic characters, who were like always, I'd rather destroy my work than allow it to be compromised. And, sorry, I didn't mean to get off on that long thing. I don't know what started me thinking about Ayn Rand. Oh, just people writing politics, people giving a lecture, excuse me, people giving a lecture but not hiring a hall. If you want to give a lecture, hire a hall. If you don't want to give a lecture, then just get on with what you're doing. And if you're writing a story, making a movie, whatever, do it. Do that. And if other stuff sneaks in, fine. But don't regale people with your opinions at nauseating length. This, by the way, in our own field, last thing, and then I'm going to start reading. This, by the way, in our own field is what, to my mind, went really wrong with Robert Heinlein in the last 20 years or so of his writing career. For those of you who are not so familiar, Heinlein, of course, was one of the most famous American science fiction writers. He wrote Stranger in a Strange Land and Glory Road and a bunch of famous Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Starship Troopers, all kinds of things. And he was always kind of a military guy and a bit of a libertarian, which is fine, both of them. But increasingly, his kind of weird personal philosophies just took over his books, and his characters as he aged. His main heroic characters also aged. So by the time he was in his 50s and 60s, his heroic characters that all the young gals fell in love with were like his age, whereas all the 20 or whatever, 20s to 30-year-old men in his stories were like all wimps who didn't deserve to have the love of these sexy young babes. And it really put me off. I mean, I already disagreed with a lot of his philosophical stuff, but as it got more and more naked, it just kind of got to me after a while, and I just went, I'm not enjoying his books anymore. Anyway, okay, so we are now going back to the Dragons of Ordinary Farm. Okay, and I just realized I just stole the Blackadder theme music for my Dragons of Ordinary Farm intro. Chapter 20, called Last One. And I am going to read because I've already spent a huge amount of time babbling. Tyler wasn't falling anymore. Now he seemed to be floating in darkness, but floating didn't come close to describing how uncomfortable he was. He was so dizzy that ordinarily he would have felt sick to his stomach. But he couldn't find his stomach. It didn't even seem like he had a body. It seemed as though he was only a brain floating in some jar of dark liquid. Eyeless, voiceless, helpless. But he was still cold, shockingly, shiveringly cold. No body, but still freezing? How unfair could things get? Tyler tried to move and found he could feel his body a little, but it seemed impossibly distant, as though his head was a kite and the rest of him was a mile below him, holding the string. He began to wonder if something really bad had happened to him. Was he unconscious? Crippled? Worse, was he dead? A kind of angry strength surged through him at that thought. Whatever was going on, he wasn't just going to accept it. Tyler Jenkins didn't just let things happen to him. He made things happen. He exerted all the strength of his thoughts to push away the darkness, to go somewhere, to wake up, to do something. Nothing happened. He tried again and again. He thought of heroic things. He thought of terrible things and then told himself only he could stop them from happening. He thought of the people he loved, his mom, his dad, even Lucinda. Yes, he supposed he really did love her, as much of a pain as she was sometimes. But none of these thoughts did anything to change the terrible facts. There was nothing to push against. There was nothing to get away from. He was lost in complete emptiness, floating in unending black like a bubble in a tar pit. Tyler cried then, or at least he thought he did. It was hard to tell. He didn't know how long he'd been drifting helplessly when he realized for the first time that although he still could not tell up from down or left from right, the blackness no longer seemed like a single uniform thing. He could feel little differences that, if he had been in water, would have been in changes in pressure or colder or warmer currents. Some bits of the darkness seemed to be flowing over him, others to be flowing away. Some seemed more inviting, some less. But did it mean anything? When he felt that warmer current again, he could just as accurately have called it clearer or gentler or even just safer. He first tried to follow it, but after considering for a moment, he changed his direction, doing his best to reach out in the direction from which this new feeling came. Better to be moving toward whatever caused that feeling of greater safety than away from it. To his relief, he thought he could actually feel himself beginning to move, although not in any normal way. Things were changing. He felt it. He was certain. As the currents of black washed over and through him, the different sensations began to seem so strong that he almost felt he could name them, although the words that floated up in his thoughts were obviously nonsense. Things like greenward and whenwise. And once he even heard a voice in his head saying, a half turn toward yes, but on the nextward facing side. Still, he didn't have to understand how it worked to use it. It was a bit like typing class. After you got the hang of how to do it, you didn't even have to look down at your fingers on the keyboard anymore. You just watched the words appear on the screen in front of you. He was learning. That was what he was doing. He just didn't know what exactly was being learned. After a timeless time, Tyler began to see the changes he had at first only felt. Light was growing around him. Not a single glow, but streaks and sparks, as though reality itself was starting up again, like a video game that had been stuck. Something drew him toward one of the smears of light. Then a moment later, the glare was all around him. And then he fell through. Cold was his first thought. He could feel ground under his feet, hear wind in his ears. But it's still so cold. His second thought was Christmas. Because everything around him was white, white, white. The whole world was covered in snow. Trees, rocks, the side of a hill, all banked and drowned in white. A winter wilderness. The bitter wind even brought snow swirling up from the drifts on the ground like puffs of smoke. Tyler wasn't wearing anything but his ordinary clothes, nothing warmer than a sweatshirt to keep out this icy chill. His lost flashlight was lying in the snow beside him, as out of place as he was. He bent and picked it up. Already he was trembling so hard he could barely stand. Where am I? How did I get here? Oh man, I'm going to freeze to death. A moment later, two brown shapes tumbled out of the hill in front of him. One of them was huge, but both of them were covered in fur. A cave, Tyler abruptly realized. They had come out of a cave, the big one attacking and the small one falling backward. Now the big shape was up on its hind legs, claws and teeth flashing. It was some kind of bear, and the small, huddled, doomed creature on the ground was a person in fur clothing lying unmoving in the icy flakes. Whoever the poor guy was, he was going to die, that was obvious. The bear was bigger than anything Tyler had ever seen, taller than a polar bear, but dark. It had dropped down onto four legs now and was closing the distance between itself and the still figure. The bear had started out cautiously, but had clearly decided its downed enemy posed no danger. Freezing, shivering, 100 yards away, Tyler suddenly realized he was about to watch a human being die. He scrabbled in the snow with numb hands, trying to find a rock, but the snow was too deep. He began taking hopping steps down the deep snow of the hillside, waving his arms and shouting, "Hey! No! Leave them alone! Hey!" The bear stopped. Tyler took another couple of awkward steps before he realized what he'd just done. "Oh, crap," he said. With a fresh new meal in sight, this one with its fur already removed, the bear reared up and waved its claws. It ducked its head, opened its huge fanged muzzle, and roared, a sound so loud and deep that it shook snow from some of the trees. It was at least twice Tyler's height, and looked as impossibly large and deadly as a T-Rex. "I'm going to die," he thought, "and I don't even know how this happened." There was a flurry of movement at the bear's feet as the small shape there rolled over and bent, then for a moment actually seemed to be trying to tackle the monstrous animal. The bear took a step back and doubled over, its growl rising to a bizarre, coughing snarl as it nipped at its own belly, where the long handle of a spear was now wagging, the head sunk deep in the bear's guts. The monster took a step toward the fur-covered figure in front of it, still snarling, and swiped with its massive paws, but the human threw himself to the side, and the strike narrowly missed. The bear hesitated for a moment, but blood was already spattering the snow beneath it. It dropped to all fours and lurched away unsteadily down the hillside toward the trees, staining the snow with its blood as it went. As soon as it disappeared from sight, the fur-clad warrior got to his feet again and looked to Tyler, who was standing knee-deep in the snow, dumbfounded, shivering even harder as he realized how close he had come to getting eaten. "The Great One would have killed me," the spear wielder said in a tone of dull wonder, his voice surprisingly high-pitched, as if he was no more than Tyler's own age. What showed of his face in the crude fur hood was bloody. "Where do you come from?" Tyler tried to say something, although he had a feeling that the words California and Standard Valley wouldn't mean much here, but his teeth were chattering so hard he couldn't talk. He wasn't cold any longer, though, he suddenly realized. In fact, he felt surprisingly warm. He took a step forward and then decided that he must have walked into a sudden blizzard because abruptly everything was white and his mouth was full of snow. He only dimly felt it as the hooded stranger pulled his face out of the snow and began to drag him back toward the cave. Tyler was lying on the floor beside the tiniest, most pathetic fire he had ever seen. 3 skinny sticks and a wad of damp grass. He was cold again, miserably so, his body racked by shivers so strong he thought they might break his bones. The man he had saved was crouched nearby, wiping blood from his face with a handful of snow. The features that began to appear from beneath the smears of red were smaller and younger than Tyler had expected, although it was still hard to tell because of the remaining mud and blood. The stranger looked at him with a mixture of mistrust and pity. "Who are you? Why did you risk your life for me? Why do you wear such strange skins? Are you from the ghost lands?" That sounded vaguely familiar, but Tyler was too busy shaking himself to pieces to try to answer any of it. The caveman, if that's what he was, watched him for a moment, then pulled Tyler into a sitting position, tugged him back against his own chest, then untied the rawhide laces of the rough jacket. Let me try that again. Tugged him back against his own chest, then untied the rawhide laces of the rough jacket or poncho he was wearing. When he had it undone and opened, he cradled Tyler against his body like a child, and then closed the thick hide garment around them both. After a few moments, Tyler began to warm up, just enough so that he could feel the sting of returning feeling down his spine. He pulled his hands up and tucked them into his armpits to get warm. They began to tingle and smart, too. After a few more moments, Tyler realized from the contours of the bare skin he could feel pressing against his back that it was not a caveman in whose life-saving embrace he was being warmed, and who had just stabbed a stone-headed spear into the biggest bear Tyler could ever imagine. It was a cave woman, a girl, even. "Do you have a name?" Tyler asked her. Now that he didn't feel quite so much like he was going to die, the weirdness of the whole adventure had begun to overwhelm him. How had he ended up here? Where was he, anyway? Somewhere on present-day Earth, or back in time, like in a movie? And why could he understand this girl's speech? He could hear the harsh, unfamiliar words she spoke, even as the meaning of what she said bloomed in his head. "Nothing as strange as Tyler," she told him. "They called me Last One because I was the youngest, but they are all dead now. I suppose I am Last One for real." From the sadness of what she said, he would have expected at least a tear, but although the claw marks on her forehead and cheeks still dribbled blood, she had the hard, secretive face Tyler had seen on some of the men waiting at the Veterans Hospital bus stop back home, the mark of a difficult and frightening life. Back home. How was he going to get home? "You saved me," last one said. "The Great One would have killed me for trying to take his cave. I was only looking for some place to get warm, but I was careless. I should have smelled his fresh stink." "I have to go," Tyler said, struggling to his feet. "My family, my sister." He shook his head. I have to go back." But how would he get there? He had stepped out of thin air, it seemed. "You will die if you go outside," she told him. "It will be dark soon, and the bear is not dead. If he lives, he will be back. One like him took all my family. I do not know what we did to anger the Great Ones so." Her matted hair fell in her face as she looked at Tyler's thin clothes, his soaked athletic shoes. "He is not the only hunter either, and your skins will not keep you warm out there, I think." "But I have to go." He didn't doubt anything she said, but with returning feeling in his hands and feet, he was also swept by a tremendous aching loneliness. Whether he had actually somehow traveled back in time to the Ice Age, or this was some even stranger place, he couldn't stand to think he might be stuck here. If he waited through the night, he might not be able to find the spot where he had arrived. "I have to go," he said again. She sighed. It was weird to hear such a modern sound of frustration here in this place. "Then I will come with you, because otherwise you will be dead before morning." "You don't need to do that." "My life is yours now." She said it as simply as if she was talking about the weather. "The Great One would have taken me otherwise." He had been right, Tyler decided as he tottered out into the cold wind with the girl beside him. Although he was already starting to shiver badly, he could still see traces of his deep footprints coming down the hill, traces that would certainly be gone by morning. Not that it helped him much. The prints simply stopped at a point halfway up the slope, but even that was something. He halted where the footprints began. There was nothing here but cold air and snow, but he closed his eyes tightly and tried to ignore the wind, his own trembling body, and the idea that the wounded, angry bear might be back at any moment. What had led him to this cold world? A feeling? A trace of something he couldn't explain? What could take him back? Something similar, he hoped. For a long moment he couldn't see or feel anything except the beginnings of what it was going to be like to freeze to death here on the hillside. Then the girl took his hand in her own, and the trace of warmth, instead of distracting him, reminded him of what he was looking for. Home. Something like a faint light in the distance almost startled him into opening his eyes, but it was not light from the world around him. It was a light inside his thoughts. Tyler moved toward it, or it moved toward him. It wasn't easy. Other currents pushed and pulled at him, trying to tug him off the track, but he did his best to ignore them and to keep moving forward. The light became stronger, but whatever resisted him became stronger too, until Tyler felt that he was trying to shove his way through water that was hardening into ice all around him. "Lucinda," he thought. "She'll get hurt if I'm not around. I have to get back. She needs me to help her be brave." And he needed her, too, he realized, to remind him there were other ways to do things besides charging straight ahead. The thought gave him an idea. Tyler changed his angle and found he could move toward the light in his thoughts, not by fighting his way, but by slipping ahead through the areas of least resistance, while remembering always what his final destination was. The light came closer. A light he could feel in his bones so that he wondered if he was glowing from the inside out like an X-ray. He reached for it. He found it and stepped through. It was only as the warmth rose all around him that he realized the girl from the winter world was still holding onto his hand. Tyler opened his eyes. For a moment, disappointment washed over him like a drowning tide. It was too dark to see anything, but he could feel rough stone under his hands. It was another cave, more rock and dirt. He wasn't home. He hadn't managed to do anything. He crawled forward, pulling his flashlight out of his sweatshirt pocket and shining it over the rock walls. It seemed to be something like the bear cave. Then he saw a flat roof above him that looked too solid and smooth to be natural stone. The girl had scrambled away from him, cowering from the light, obviously terrified. It's okay, he told her. It's just a flashlight, see? How I got it? She asked, eyes wide with alarm. Huh? Can't you understand me? He shook his head. Why should things suddenly be any less weird on this farm? The flashlight beam revealed the trapdoor in the flat ceiling above them, and Tyler finally realized where they were, in the silo, under the floor. He swept the light back across the cavern and saw that the silo had been built on top of a crevice in the ground, a great mouth of rock and dirt. He and the girl named Last One had just crawled out of it. The fault line, he thought. Octavio Tinker's fault line. This is it. He clambered up the ladder, bolted to the cavern wall next to the trap door, but the door was locked, and all his rattling and shaking couldn't open it. They were trapped in a deserted building. Oh, well, he thought, then began to shout. Hello! Help! Somebody help us! He pounded on the trap door. Ragnar! Mr. Walkwell! Somebody! Help! He had been calling for about 5 minutes when the trap door above him rattled, and he heard the snap of the lock opening. The door lifted and fell back with an echoing thunk. Then a bright beam of light came through the opening in the ceiling and swept the cavernous room, blinding Tyler for a moment. The cave girl growled in fear. Tyler swung up his own light as if in self-defense, and the light moved off him. A dark shape clambered down from the ladder and dropped to the floor. Oh, Jenkins, you idiot, said Colin Needle, shaking his head in gleeful disgust as he looked from Tyler to the cave girl. You couldn't just mind your own business, could you? And now you've really messed up. You might as well go pack your bags. And we're going to start this one. Chapter 21, A Blow to the Brain. One thing Colin really liked about those Jenkins kids, they were their own worst enemies. It never seemed to have occurred to them that he might be keeping track of where they were. Both of their rooms empty after nightfall? Something had to be up. Noises in the silo, a building that was kept empty at all times? Who else would it be? But it wasn't just Tyler Jenkins he had discovered in the fault line cavern. There was a girl, too, a stranger. Paleolithic, from the looks of her. It happened occasionally with the fault line, these spontaneous manifestations. Like stuff washed up on a beach, he supposed, or left behind on a riverbank, tossed out of the flow of time. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But Jenkins screwing up so badly, that was something Colin had been waiting for. I'm serious, he said. Go pack your suitcase. You're as good as gone. You creep! Tyler stomped toward him, pointing a finger. What are you doing, following me everywhere I go? Gideon should never have brought you to the farm. Colin turned his back and went quickly up the ladder and through the trap door into the empty silo. But now he's going to realize his mistake. because I'm going to tell him what you've been doing, messing with his biggest, most important secret." He shoved open the door and went out into the warm night. "Oh, yeah?" said Tyler. He ran up the ladder and out the door after Colin, waving his flashlight like it was a Star Wars lightsaber. Colin laughed. Did the kid really want to pick a fight? He was a full head shorter than Colin was. Still, the idiot kept coming at him, and the light got in Colin's eyes, blinding him. He had underestimated and did not get his hands up in time as Tyler Jenkins swung a fist and hit him in the neck. Colin stumbled back, choking, and the younger boy was on him with arms windmilling so fast Colin was driven further backward. "Tyler, stop!" someone shouted even as Colin slipped and fell. The Jenkins kid seized the advantage and began pummeling the side of Colin's head. Colin swung his own right hand around and delivered a satisfyingly nasty blow to Tyler's face. Then he was back in the game again, slapping and scratching and butting with his head until he could get off his back. Another flashlight was playing over them, and someone was still shouting at them as they jumped at each other. "Tyler, no! No! Let go of him!" It was Lucinda's voice. They were rolling, struggling with each other like wild animals. Jenkins managed to get on top of him again, and Colin was lashing out, hitting anything he could, when Tyler suddenly straightened up. Lucinda had grabbed the neck of her brother's sweatshirt and was pulling as hard as she could. She had caught him by surprise. Tyler fell back, allowing Colin to struggle free. "What are you two doing?" The words were barely out of her mouth when Colin jumped past her and tackled her brother again. He wasn't going to lose the advantage she'd given him. The two of them went down again, kicking and thrashing so that dust flew up in a cloud, obscuring the beam of Lucinda's flashlight. Then, suddenly, there was triumph. Colin was atop the wretched Jenkins boy, sitting on his chest. He put his forearm on Tyler's throat and heard the choking sounds begin. God, he was going to enjoy this. Then a shadow moved over Colin, and something smashed down on his head, turning his bones and muscles to water. After that, it all just went blank. The next thing Colin felt was a throbbing in his head like the aftermath of an explosion, as if something had blown his skull into hot pieces that were barely holding together. My brain, he thought. Somebody knocked my bloody brain out. Colin tried to sit up, but just the tiny movement of bracing his hands against the ground made him feel dizzy and sick. So he gave up. It was dark where he lay, which was just as well. Light in his eyes would have felt like a blowtorch. "What's with this farm?" Lucinda was saying. "I mean, Tyler, who are all these people? What are they up to? Witches? Monsters? Magicians? You were right, Tyler. You were so right, and it just keeps getting crazier." "You think that's crazy," her brother answered, "but you haven't heard what happened to me yet." The pain in Colin's head was so bad that he began to think he might throw up. He rolled over onto his hands and knees and crouched, his aching head against the cool dirt. The two Jenkins children fell silent. When he could, Colin turned around and sat up, but even that careful movement, made the world swim, and he groaned loudly. At this new sound, the stranger in the hooded cape moved toward him, growling quietly as if in reply, and raising a menacing hand. The face in the hood was smeared with dirt, so that Colin could see little more than staring eyes and bared teeth. But the large rock in the creature's dirty paw made things clear. This was the bastard who had smashed in his skull. And if this spawn of the fault line wanted to do it again, there wasn't much Colin could do to stop it. He raised trembling hands in front of his face. "No! Don't hit him again!" cried Lucinda. The crouching shape stopped and cocked its head like a dog when its name was called, hearing but not quite understanding. "Nakrut?" it asked. It was a girl, or at least the voice sounded like it, Not Krut? No, I guess not, Tyler said. Don't Krut him. He laughed a little, which only made Colin ache to hit him again. Hey, I speak cave language. Cave language? Asked Lucinda. Yeah, you'll never guess where I've just been, Luce. I think it was the Ice Age. It wasn't very easy getting back either. I'm still not quite sure how I did it. For a moment, Colin forgot the throbbing misery of his head. Tyler's words rang in his thoughts like a sudden thunderclap. The Ice Age? Was that what the Jenkins kid had just said? That he'd gone somewhere, not just been around when this prehistoric murderess had washed up out of some backwater of time? Yeah, that's where this girl's from, Tyler went on excitedly. Her name is Last One, or at least that's what she told me when she could still talk. Do you think she'll learn how again? She sure took care of Junior Dr. Evil. He turned toward Colin. Hey, Needle, had enough? You stepped to me, you better step up strong. Spare me your trashy hip-hop video dialogue, Colin told him. But inside he was suddenly very frightened. Was it true? Could Tyler Jenkins navigate the fault line without an instrument? This could change everything. Even if Colin's grand scheme worked out, the one he had spent months planning, Gideon would probably still prefer these stupid, heedless kids. It was unfair beyond belief. They had to go. They'd ruin everything. You've gone too far this time, Jenkins, Colin snarled. Gideon is going to have you both out of here by tomorrow morning. Colin, please, said Lucinda. Whatever we did wrong, we're sorry. Tyler, what are you talking about? Ice Age? Where did she come from, really? I told you. I went to the Ice Age, I think. Anyway, it was totally snowy, and there was this giant monster bear, and she killed it with a spear. He shook his head as though even he was having trouble believing it all. First I was exploring the silo, and I fell through something. We were right, Lucinda. That's where the breach is, or the fault line, or whatever Octavio Tinker called it. It's a cave underneath the silo. It's like a hole in time or something. Shock and fear washed over Colin. How had they found out all these things? Had someone spilled all the secrets to them? Are you actually saying you traveled through the fault line? He made his voice hard, wanting to test Tyler. That you went into the past and came back? That's impossible. You calling me a liar? The boy looked like he was about to jump all over Colin again, but Lucinda reached out a hand toward him. I came back by, I don't know, I came back the same way I got there. I found the spot I came in and just thought about going back, sort of. He shrugged at a loss for words. So it was true. But Colin was only defeated, he realized, if Gideon found out. Otherwise, they were just annoying kids. Maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea to tell Gideon Goldring, after all. Who knew what information might come out of such an argument? Lucinda was walking in circles. Ice Age? This is all so crazy. I didn't even get to tell you what happened to me. Mr. Walkwell, he isn't even human. He's some kind of part man, part animal? A fawn, I think? Tyler stared at her as if she had lost her mind. What, like Bambi? No, you know, like the guy in, what's it called, Narnia. Mr. Walkwell's a lion? Now Tyler sank down in the dirt beside the cave girl, shaking his head. I don't get it. I'll explain later, but he's a goat man. I think it's called a fawn. Oh, they were a cute little comedy act, these two, Colin thought. He would dance for joy when he was finally rid of them. Not just a fawn, but a tutelary spirit, he said, wiping some of the dirt and blood from his face with the sleeve of his sweater. To be precise, Mr. Walkwell is the genius loci of ordinary farm. He was feeling his way back to control again. How did you find out about Mr. Walkwell, Lucinda? She told him about the fire, the singing, and the man Mr. Walkwell had captured. Stillman, said Colin. He tried to sound casual, but his heart was thundering. What had he gotten himself into? He had thought he was only manipulating that fat fool Modesto, but Stillman was a billionaire, and he wanted the whole farm. Still, it was too late to turn back now. I think I've heard the name, but I can't imagine what interest he'd have in some little farm like ours. Oh, yeah, sneered Tyler. Some little farm, right. Some little farm with dragons and monsters and a hole that leads back 1,000,000 years into the Ice Age. You'd better keep your mouth shut about that, Colin told him. I won't be able to save you if you start babbling about visiting the past. What are you talking about? Why should I keep my mouth shut? And why would you want to save me, especially after I kicked your butt? Colin bit back his anger. After your primitive friend hit me, you mean? He took a breath. Calm, he told himself, calm. Because if you keep your mouth shut and do it my way, Gideon will think it was just an overflow from the fault line. It happens occasionally. That's where the griffin eggs came from. They just showed up one day. Sometimes the fault line opens up enough that we could step into it if we dared. Other times it just sort of spits things out. We have to tell him it was one of those situations, because if you tell Gideon you went into the fault line on your own and came back, he'll know you were messing around with the silo and he'll go completely berserk. He really will kick you out in a heartbeat. Lucinda looked upset, but her brother looked suspicious. That still doesn't explain why you want to help us. You hate my guts, Needle. Admit it. He hesitated. I'll admit I don't like you much, Jenkins, but your sister has been nice to me, and I'd hate to see her punished for something you did. Which was just true enough that he could say it with convincing feeling. Lucinda had been kind to him. Colin wasn't used to it. Lucinda Jenkins looked at her brother with an expression almost of triumph, an expression that said, See, I told you. She turned to Colin and smiled. Thank you, Colin. That's generous of you. He felt a little bad, but only a little. Well, if you agree, we'd better figure out how we're going to explain that thug, he thought, looking at the creature who had hit him. But he didn't say the word, only gestured. To Gideon. Hang on, said Tyler. That's all fine, but how can Gideon afford to get rid of us anyway? We know all about this place now. We could tell everyone what we've seen. Colin laughed. He wouldn't just let you go. He'd have my mother brew up one of her special medicines and adjust your memories. She's good at that. It's sort of like hypnotism. She's had to do it with a couple of government inspectors over the years. He couldn't help noticing that Lucinda's expression had completely changed. The girl was looking at him as though she had just remembered he was a space alien who wanted to eat her. Lucinda, did I say something that upset you? No, she said, shaking her head rapidly. No, Colin, go on. He had no idea what that was about, but he didn't have time to waste worrying. He was trying to get this whole disastrous night back under control. Colin couldn't afford anything that would upset his plans before he met with Modesto again. There could be no more excitement on the farm, no more upheavals, starting now. Both Jenkins kids were watching him, waiting to hear what he said next. The cave girl, who had almost knocked his head in, now crouched beside them, cowed and anxious. With nothing but his wits, Colin had taken control of a bad situation and was back in charge. He was very proud of himself. And that's where we're going to stop. End of the chapter. Next chapter, see, coming up, chapter 22. At last, some answers. If it ever gets a chance to focus on that. Whoop, put it in the middle and it'll probably focus. At last, some answers. And at last, some scissors, although I don't exactly remember why, because I haven't read the book since we wrote it. But anyway, doesn't matter. So, despite my ridiculous amount of babble about dogs and cats and things like that, at the beginning of tonight's reading, we actually finished 2 chapters. So that's a good thing. Or we got to the end of the 2nd chapter. So that's all good. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, all of you. I will be, what was I going to say? I will be seeing some of you, those of you who care to drop by at 7 p.m. tonight, Halloween night. For those of you who will be out celebrating Halloween in some shape or form, it's always been perhaps my very favoriteest holiday, going back to childhood. I hope you enjoy it. We are in that stage of life right now where all of our kids are finally too old again to trick or treat. I don't know if any of us will be doing anything because we live up in the hills where there aren't really kids running around trick-or-treating. And those few who are brave enough to do so are often eaten by catamounts or coyotes, which is a Halloweenish kind of thing for those of us who live here. They'd be able to stand out on our deck and listen to the sounds of small children being chased and devoured by wild animals. Little Edward Gorey-esque maybe for some, but we enjoy it. It's part of the positives of living in a rural area. Anyway, but I do wish you a very good Halloween. I will be reading 7 o'clock my time. For anybody who wants to join me, we'll be on to the next chapter. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones, your friends and neighbors. Time marches on. Things get a little bit better all the time. And so far, so good. So stick with me. I will stick with you. And together, we will do something. Triumph? Who knows? Survive? Yeah, I'm in favor. Have a good night. Have a good day. Have a good morning, wherever you may be. And I will see you real soon.